right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello to everyone joining us on the webinar today, and for joining us for the Hawai'i Public Health Training HIlo's webinar, Youth Vaping 101. Let's first introduce myself and other organizers of the training today. So my name is Stephanie Moyer, and I'm the Community Initiatives and Training Coordinator with the Hawai'i Public Health Institute. I'd also like to acknowledge Makamai Namahoe, our Contracts, Grants, and Operations Assistant, as well as the Hawai'i Public Health Training HIlo Steering Committee, which is made up of 14 members from various organizations. I'd like to thank our sponsors and partners for today's webinar, the Hawai'i Public Health Training HIlo, the Western Region Public Health Training Center, and the Public Health Learning Network. We are offering continuing education credits for today's webinar. You'll see in these 5 different areas. I do specifically want to point out for those that are seeking credits for CHES, you will notice that the code looks different today, and that's because they've changed their coding system. So that's not an error on the slide, but a new way that they'll be coding. So if that looks a little bit different from the past, that is why. To request your continuing education credits, we do ask that you complete the evaluation that I will be sending out to you following the completion of today's webinar. We give you 2 weeks to fill out the evaluation, and after that, I will do the certificates and send those out to you by Monday, August 26th. If after that 2-week time frame you have not received your certificate, but you know that you did the evaluation, please feel free to reach out to either myself or Maka via email. For disclosure, for today's webinar for nursing, planners and presenters have no relevant financial relationships to disclose. Do want to remind those seeking nursing credits that you do need to go to the University of Arizona's College of Nursing to complete a separate evaluation, and that is the website listed there, and we will also post that into the chat box for you. And please also remember that the evaluation for nursing will expire after 2 weeks, and it is password protected now. So the password for today's webinar is vaping with a capital V. We are using Zoom today for this webinar, and we will be recording it. Once we are complete with today's webinar, it will be posted up to our Hawai'i Public Health Training HIlo's YouTube channel. Without further ado, it's my honor to introduce to you our guest speaker for today, Dr. Forrest Batz, and he is retired faculty from the Daniel K. Inouye College of Pharmacy at the University of Hawaii at HIlo. He has been involved in tobacco prevention and supporting individuals to quit tobacco products for 30 years. Dr. Batz serves on the board for the Hawai'i Public Health Institute. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Forrest Batz.
Thank you, Steph. Sorry, before I get going, I just want to say that I don't have any financial relationships to disclose for the presentation. And as far as learning objectives, what I'd like you to be able to do by the end of this presentation is to compare national, state, and local Hawaii youth vaping rates, to be able to discuss the 3 top reasons why youth use electronic smoking devices, to be able to help educate the public on the health implications of youth vaping, to address the youth vaping epidemic with health professionals and community leaders, and to discuss potential health impacts of vaping and recent changes in electronic smoking device technology that increase the vulnerability of youth to ESD use and nicotine addiction. There are a variety of terms that I'll be using interchangeably, including electronic cigarette, e-cig, e-cigarette, electronic nicotine delivery system, or ENDS, electronic smoking device, ESD, as well as vape and vaping. There are distinct groups that use electronic smoking devices Today, we will not be talking about adult tobacco smokers. We will not be talking about adults who use ESDs for recreational purposes. We will be focusing on youth who are using electronic smoking devices and the implications and impacts that these devices have on youth. So what I'd like you to do before we get going is to write down 1 or 2 questions that you might have about vaping, and we'll circle back to these at the end of the presentation and make sure that they've all been addressed. In 2009, the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act authorized the FDA to regulate the manufacture, distribution, and marketing of tobacco products. This is a big change in FDA's ability to regulate tobacco products. In 2016, the FDA determined electronic nicotine delivery systems, or e-cigarettes, to be tobacco products subject to their regulation. E-cigarettes and flavors were determined that they needed to go through an application and approval process, the deadline of which was set in August of 2018. But in 2017, the FDA postponed that application deadline to August of 2022. And what that means is that the products that are currently on the market are essentially unregulated. They've not gone through any kind of application or approval process. We'll come back to this toward the end of the presentation with some updates, but I'd like to start at this point as far as the regulation of electronic smoking devices. Just a reminder, Hawaii was the first state to raise the age of tobacco purchase to 21, and that included both tobacco products like cigarettes and vape products. As far as the use of tobacco products in the U.S. among middle and high school students, the rate of use in 2018 was about 27%, but about 21% of those users were using electronic smoking devices. So the vast majority of high school and middle school students who use tobacco products are using e-cigarettes rather than the more traditional products. As far as comparing national use and Hawaii use, the national high school use rate is about 21%, and the national middle school use rate is about 5%. Now, these numbers are current as of November of 2018. The high school and middle school use rates for Hawaii, separate out by island, all exceed the national rates, both for high school and middle school use, but these numbers are 2 years old. We won't have the current numbers until sometime in early 2020, and we don't know at this point if our numbers will go up the way the national numbers went up last November, but even comparing old Hawaii numbers with the newest national numbers, Hawaii clearly has a much bigger problem as far as youth use of e-cigarettes compared to the national rates. Over the last 20 plus years, we've seen the teen use of cigarettes drop precipitously from about 37% in 1997 down to under 8% in 2018. But starting at about 2015, we began to see an uptick in the use of nicotine products in the form of vaping. And we are seeing almost entire reversal of the drop in nicotine use rates among teens with the introduction and the generalized popularity of vaping among teens. So one of the questions that comes up commonly is, why do youth vape? And we don't have a lot of hard data, but a study published in 2018 found that taste was the #1 reason, that experimentation was #2, and replacing cigarettes was a distant #3. What are e-cigarettes? While their shape and their configurations can change. Essentially, they're devices that contain a battery, a coil that's heated by the battery, a section where e-juice, which is made up of nicotine, propylene glycol, vegetable glycerin, and flavoring, is stored. And when a person inhales on the device, it actuates the battery to heat the coil to volatilize the liquid that's in the chamber, creating what we see as vape, or the aerosol that's produced. There has been a significant change over the last 10 or plus years as far as the technology around e-cigarettes. Initially, we saw devices that looked like cigarettes. They were they were disposable. They were neither refillable nor rechargeable. And then over the years, we've seen devices that are either rechargeable, refillable, or both. The mods came on the market, which were devices in which components can be interchanged to change the quality and the quantity of the vape produced. And then most recently, in about 2015, the pod-based devices were introduced that were shaped like USB jump drives and contained, that use replaceable pods containing very high concentration nicotine. In fact, nicotine more than double the average concentration of all the previous devices and e-liquids that were available. Broken down, these pod-based devices contain a variety of components, including the device itself, a USB charger, and then the pre-filled e-juice pods. In this case, pods that contain 0.7 mLs of e-juice per pod. And notice the photo on the bottom left with the thumbnail next to, the person's thumb next to the e-juice pod, and those pods are really about the size of a thumbnail. One of the additional changes in the technology that was introduced by the pod system was a different form of nicotine. Nicotine in previous e-juice products was in what's called the freebase form, which is alkaline in pH. And that alkaline pH produces a burning in the throat when the vape is inhaled, much like the burn in the throat from inhaling a tobacco cigarette. What the initial company, Juul, that brought the pod-based devices onto the market did was they added benzoic acid to lower the pH, to make the pH more acidic and very close to neutral, which resulted in a vape that has very little burn or irritation effects on the throat, making it much smoother to inhale and much less off-putting to people who've never vaped or smoked before. And the introduction of these nic salt products allowed companies to produce e-juice of much higher concentration. Note that the pod-based device on the left, the nicotine salts are in a concentration of 59 milligrams per ml. So even when less than 1 ml is present, a large amount of nicotine can be delivered from a very small pod. Whereas the nicotine base that's used in all of the previous products was anywhere from 0 to 36 milligrams per mil and often averaging around 20 milligrams per mil. So about a third of the concentration of nicotine per ml of that in the new pod-based devices with the nic salts. Another way to think about this is that the concentrated nic salt pods, 1.7 ml pod containing 5% nicotine or 59 milligrams per ml is the equivalent of 41 cigarettes. There are pod-based devices that can deliver the equivalent of up to 8 packs of nicotine, up to 8 packs of cigarettes from one pod, and we don't know where this technology is going and how much more concentrated the nicotine in these pod-based ESD devices will become in the future. A different way to think about this is some information published with one of the patents that Juul filed when they brought their product out on the market. The blue curve, or the blue area under the curve, is the nicotine delivered by e-liquid with free-base nicotine. That's the old style of e-liquid that was available on the market before Juul came on the market. The black area under the curve is the nicotine delivered by a combustible cigarette, and the gold-colored curve is the nicotine delivered by nic salts under the Juul patent. And what this tells us is that the nic salts that Juul is including in their product, they spike the nicotine levels in the blood very similarly to cigarettes, but they stay in the blood a shorter time than the nicotine delivered by cigarettes, which means that the withdrawal period for e-cigarette users who are vaping this form of nic salt, their withdrawal begins sooner than it would begin if they were smoking combustible cigarettes. And we've all heard that vape is just water vapor, right? And actually, the vape that's produced by e-cigarettes is an aerosol. It's not a true vapor. It's not the gas form of a liquid. It's a mixture of a variety of droplets and particles that are suspended in the air. Some are present in the e-juice, others are produced during the e-cigarette heating process. As far as the youth use of nicotine, we know that daily e-cig users have significantly higher nicotine levels than non-daily users. So those who vape intermittently are going to have lower blood levels of nicotine than those who vape daily. It turns out that 40% of youth who reported using nicotine-free vape products had urine markers of nicotine in their system, which means they were vaping nicotine e-liquid without knowing it. They thought they were vaping nicotine-free. And that pod users' nicotine intake is significantly higher than non-pod vaping users. So again, those nic salts that are higher concentration, that are easier on the throat, lead to higher intake of nicotine. As far as the e-juices, they contain nicotine, propylene glycol, vegetable glycerin, and a variety of flavoring chemicals that lead to their characteristic flavors. Notice that the packaging for these products and the flavors themselves are really aimed at youth. These are not flavors that we would expect most adults to gravitate to. The manufacturers and the sellers of vape products will tell you that their products, their e-juice products, contain ingredients that are approved safe by the FDA. And that's a partial truth. The propylene glycol and some of the other e-juice ingredients may be approved as safe for use in foods, as food ingredients, but they are not approved as safe for inhalation. We consume food products. They are impacted by the digestive tract. Some of the food ingredients that we consume are absorbed. Some pass out of the body unabsorbed. But that's really different than inhaling these products into the very sensitive lungs and having the droplets and the particles in the vape impact the lining of the lungs and be readily absorbed into the bloodstream, where they may have impact on other parts of the body. ESD marketing, we know that even from data as old as 2016, that the vast majority of youth are exposed to ESD marketing. We're expecting this number is trending toward 100%, simply because the marketing really ramped up through social media during 2016 and 2017. And as far as the impact of the ESD marketing and youth use, we know that youth and young adults who own e-cigarette promotional items, t-shirts, caps, and other promotional items are more than twice as likely to start vaping than those who don't have the swag. Unlike tobacco cigarette advertising, which is unallowed and tightly regulated in the US, e-cigarette advertising, promotions, and giveaways are currently unregulated, which goes back to that point I made early in the presentation. As far as youth's perception of the risks of use of ESDs, the vast majority of middle and high school students that were surveyed in one survey did not perceive any significant risk of harm from vaping. One of the things to clarify with kids is that legal does not equate to safe. And nicotine may be legal, but it's not safe, especially for youth. Nicotine is a highly addictive substance. It causes changes in brain chemistry. It stimulates pleasure centers and it alters normal brain function. As the nicotine levels in the brain drop after the use of e-cigarettes, the brain begins to crave the nicotine to feel pleasure and to relieve the feelings of anxiety and stress that come along with the dropping levels of nicotine, or a sense of what we equate with withdrawal. Nicotine addiction in youth increases the risk of other addictions, so youth who are exposed to and become addicted to nicotine are more likely to experience other addictions, including in adulthood. Now, why does this happen? There are receptors in the nervous system, and especially in the brain, that are sensitive to nicotine. They're shown here. When nicotine occupies one of those receptors or multiple receptors, it causes the release of dopamine, a neurotransmitter which is associated with pleasure. Those dopamine molecules that are released move across the synaptic cleft, the space between two nerves or neurons, and they stimulate dopamine receptors, extending that signal and triggering that sense of pleasure that accompanies the introduction of nicotine into the nervous system. As youth become exposed to nicotine, the number of receptors and the number of pathways that respond to nicotine increase. And this continues until the brain matures at around the age of 25, which is why people who start to smoke or vape after the age of 25 are much less likely to become addicted, because they can't develop more nicotine receptors or nicotine pleasure pathways. But those under 25, and especially the younger the nicotine exposure begins, the more of these additional nicotine receptors and nicotine pleasure pathways can be developed until the brain fully matures, resulting in a much higher likelihood of nicotine addiction. Now, nicotine is essentially brain poison. It slows the development of attention and learning and memory. It impairs decision-making skills at a time that's crucial for developing decision-making skills. It reduces impulse control at a time that's crucial for developing impulse control. Nicotine worsens mood, increases the likelihood of anxiety and depression, and the brain changes that result from nicotine exposure in youth can be permanent. Nicotine is a poison in high enough quantities, and it doesn't take a lot. It can cause both early and late stage poisoning. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but if you suspect or someone suspects that a person has experienced nicotine exposure and poisoning, they can either call 911 or they can call the Poison Control Center at 1-800-222-1222, both for assistance in managing the poisoning and in getting emergency care to the person as soon as possible. Nicotine also can impact pregnancy by interfering with fetal brain development, fetal lung development. It increases the risk of low birth weight, premature delivery, and stillbirth, and can increase the risk of sudden infant death. And because we know that young women in their teens can become pregnant, this is another confounding factor that is an issue as far as youth vaping, especially among females. As far as effects of vape on the lungs, this first image is a bronchoscopic image of a non-smoker. These are healthy-looking bronchioles in a non-smoker. This is the bronchioles of a smoker. Notice that they're red, they're inflamed, they are not supple in the way that the non-smoker lungs appear. And these are a bronchoscopic image of a vapor, which is somewhere in between that of the healthy lungs of a non-smoker and the severely impacted lungs of a smoker. Note that the tissues are red, they're inflamed, they're swollen, and this is not a good sign. We don't yet have good long-term data, but this short-term data tells us that the lungs do not really like vape. They don't respond well to it. As far as the effects of vape on blood vessels, the vape can lead to cell death, it can lead to oxidative stress, and to inflammation of the microvessels in which blood oxygen and nutrient exchange occurs within the cells, and that all of this increases the risk of cardiovascular disease and ups the risk factors for cardiovascular disease among people who vape. As far as oral health, we're only beginning to get a sense of the effects of vape on oral health. E-liquid ingredients soften tooth material. They allow for increased cavity-causing bacteria to stick more readily to teeth enamel. The propylene glycol breakdown products are harmful to tooth enamel and to the oral soft tissue. Vegetable glycerin and flavorings increase microbial adhesion and biofilm formation. Flavorings reduce enamel hardness, and nicotine increases the risk of gum disease and tooth loss. This is a computer tomograph of the skull of somebody who experienced a vape explosion and damage to their lower jaw. Up until recently, we didn't have good data about the number of explosions, but there was a study published after these slides had gone to press, and that it's estimated that there are about 2,900 of these explosions that occurred between 2015 and 2017 alone in the US. So about 1,500 explosions a year, causing burns, causing damage, including fractures, and in the case of one highly reported case last winter, a death. There are other effects of vape on the body, including effects on increasing airway resistance, making it more difficult to breathe, impairing the immune activity in the airway and the lungs, so the ability of the immune system to clear foreign bodies from the lungs, including bacteria, fungus, and viruses, toxicity to lung cells and the fine cilia that move foreign objects and particles out of the lungs up and allows either to swallow them or expectorate them. We know that vape promotes lung inflammation, as you saw in the bronchoscopic image a moment ago, and that we know that vape increases the risk of chronic bronchitis in youth. As far as heart and chest impacts, we know that vape increases arterial stiffness, or the ability of the blood vessels to relax or contract to control blood pressure, and that vaping doubles the risk of heart attacks. Smoking triples the risk of heart attacks, and vaping and smoking together quadruples, 4 times the risk of heart attacks. Lastly, there are impacts of vape on the stomach, including increasing the risk of stomach ulcers. As far as these recent reports and acknowledgement from the CDC about ESD Associated Seizures, there was a report back in April that there had been 35 cases of seizures associated with ESDs reported between 2010 and 2019. Yesterday, the CDC updated that with numbers that there are more than 125 reports now of ESD-associated seizures. It's not clear if there's a cause-effect relationship between ESD use and the seizures, and we're waiting for more information and a deeper dive into the causes before we know exactly what's going on, but that this is an issue of concern, especially among when it comes to youth who are vaping. I have embedded the link for a brief smoking versus vaping, long-term health effects of e-cigarettes video from researchers at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. I won't play it now, but please feel welcome to go to their YouTube channel and watch the video. It's very interesting and enlightening as far as what they're finding in their labs and what they believe may be the long-term health effects of e-cigarettes, especially among youth who have a lifetime ahead of them. And what about secondhand vape? Everybody's familiar with secondhand smoke, and that there is in fact secondhand vape. That's the vape that you or I might inhale after someone who's vaping near us has exhaled. And that secondhand vape is associated with an increased risk of asthma attacks in youth with asthma who don't vape. So youth with asthma who are around their friends who vape, but the asthma youth are not vaping themselves, they are experiencing greater likelihood of asthma attacks by the presence of the vape and their inhaling of that vape. And interestingly, also, there are some changes in behaviors among adults and their perceptions of secondhand vape. Most adult smokers have vape-free home and car policies because they've been accustomed over the years to being sensitive to the impact of their smoking as far as secondhand smoke on the people around them. So again, adult smokers tend to have vape-free and car-free vape policies. But among adult vapers and dual users, those are adult vapers and adults who vape and smoke, they don't tend to have vape-free home and vape-free car policies. They are less sensitive to the impact of their vape on those around them. Moving on to flavors, we know that the majority of youth who vape use flavored e-juice, and that there's research that tells us that youth who vape flavored vape compared to unflavored will work harder at a task to get a vape reward compared to those who vape unflavored e-juice. The flavored e-juice increases vape use. Flavored e-juice vapors are they will vape twice as often with the flavored versus the unflavored e-juice over the same period of time, and they will hold the puff. They will take deeper puffs and hold them longer compared to if they're given a nicotine flavored e-juice over a candy flavored e-juice. Among youth ESD users, the majority of them would not be report that they would not be using ESDs if the flavors did not exist, and the majority say that they would quit if the flavored products were unavailable. So a group of 17-year-olds were asked about a variety of flavors and who they thought the flavors targeted: themselves, youth who were younger than them, those a little bit older, or a lot older. And they found that among the cupcake flavored, the vast majority of these 17-year-olds thought that it was younger kids. whereas when it came to smoothie flavor, vanilla cupcake, cherry flavor, and even caramel cappuccino, it was them and those a little bit older. When it came to sour appletini and beer flavored, they thought it was those a little bit older, not those a lot older than them that these flavors were targeting. So these 17-year-olds felt that all of these flavors, including the alcohol flavors, were essentially targeting those that in our state, 21 and younger, are too young to be purchasing and using nicotine products, including e-cigarettes. As far as the flavoring and ingredients, there are thousands and thousands of these e-juice flavors, and what we hear from youth in the state is that every time a new flavor comes out, it's a trendy thing that everybody has to try. So there's no end to the new flavors and everybody needing to try that new flavor on the block. Some of the ingredients that are found in e-juices are toxic by nature. Some of them, when mixed together, so a variety of chemicals are mixed together to create an e-juice. Some of those, when combined, create new toxic compounds in that newly manufactured e-juice. Other ingredients are converted to toxic compounds when the e-juice is heated by the coil in the e-cigarette to form the vape that the person vaping inhales. And then it turns out that metals from especially the mechanism, the coil in the e-cigarettes is found in the vape aerosol, and that these metal particles that are found in the vape are toxic when inhaled. There is no safe level of metal particle inhalation for any of these metal particles. And yet all of them are found in e-vape or in the vape and are impacting the very sensitive tissues of the lungs every time somebody vapes. In addition to all of this, we're now finding that a third of high school and a quarter of middle school students who have ever used a vape device report having vaped cannabis. So there's other things that are going now into the vape than just the nicotine and the candy flavors. And that almost two-thirds of youth who used nicotine versus 40% of those who did not use nicotine have tested positive for cannabis. So the likelihood of a youth using cannabis goes up greatly if they are using nicotine. There are also other things that are being found in e-juices, usually unlabeled and potentially toxic. Bath salts or synthetic cannabis. There's a weight loss drug that's not approved by the FDA that's been found in some e-juices, and there are some e-juices that have been found to contain the erectile dysfunction drugs Viagra and Cialis. Again, it's impossible for kids to know what's in the e-juices, even if they think they do, and they have no way of knowing what they're vaping when their friend hands them an e-cigarette to vape. And then there's one more thing about ESDs, and that is that with all the progress we've made with the reduction in tobacco smoking among youth over the last 20+ years, we're seeing an uptick in the use of cigarettes, as well as at the same time that we're seeing a really big uptick in vaping, which tells us that vaping may be leading some kids who would not have been smoking tobacco cigarettes to begin smoking them now that they've been introduced to vape first. Now, regulatory updates, picking up from what we did at the beginning of the presentation. Remember in 2017, the deadline for the applications for e-cigarette products to the FDA was postponed until 2022. this last May, a federal judge ordered the FDA to begin regulating the ESDs. They said that FDA had abdicated its responsibility by postponing the application to 2022 and then backing it off to 2021. And then just a couple weeks ago, the same federal judge ordered the FDA to begin implementing the ESD applications with a submission deadline of May 2020, so about 10 months. The FDA has up to 1 year to review those applications. The products can stay on the market during that year, but the FDA has to make a determination as to whether or not the products can stay on the market. And any product that lacks an application by May of 2020, the FDA has a statutory obligation to remove it from the market. So we have seen a little bit of speeding up of this delayed process of application and approval, but we don't know how it's going to play out, and we don't know what criteria the FDA will apply to their decisions to allow or to remove vape products from the market. As far as youth vaping prevention, we have 808 No Vape here in Hawaii, which is an activity oriented organization that engages kids to develop their own messages to influence peers to avoid vaping or say no to vaping. They have an annual video competition. This last year there were about 200 entries, and the winners will be both available on social media and be screened in movie theaters across the state. I believe that those new videos will be released anytime soon. They haven't quite gotten to the release stage, but the last year winners are still on the website for those who want to take a look. We also have an active prevention program called Flavors Hook Kids, Hawai'i.org. And last year we made a big push to encourage the legislators to pass a complete flavor ban on e-cigarettes and tobacco products in the state. We made a lot of headway, but we were stalled at the last moment, and we will be making another push this year. Those of you that are interested in supporting the flavor ban, please log on to the Flavors Hook Kids Hawai'i.org website, and if you provide your name and email address, you'll receive regular emails about what you can do to help support a flavor ban and getting our legislators to protect our kids from vape. Again, from earlier in the presentation, remember the majority of kids who vape because of the flavors, and if the flavors weren't available, the majority of kids would not vape. For those of you interested in educational materials for vape prevention, we recommend the Tobacco Prevention Toolkit developed by Stanford Medical School faculty. There is a beautiful and extensive collection of materials and curricula available that you can modify in any way that you wish. The toolkit only asks that you give Stanford credit for using their materials when you make their presentations. And then lastly, there are no evidence-based youth vaping cessation programs currently available. The youth vaping epidemic has overshadowed any ability to keep up and to provide youth vaping cessation, although there are efforts taking place all over the country as we speak. The Truth Initiative recently released a text-based youth vaping cessation tool, and it can be accessed at www.thisisquitting.com. It is limited in its ability to help, but it is available, as well as the Tobacco Quit line here in Hawaii. So with that, I'd like to ask, what kind of questions did you think of when the presentation began that are either fully or partially unanswered that we can discuss now?
Okay, there was someone who had asked, does vaping help a person to quit use of tobacco?
Okay, so I want to again differentiate before I answer the question with the difference between youth vaping. Those are young people who have not ever and legally should not be exposed to nicotine, and adults who are addicted to tobacco smoke and who want to get off they're addicted to tobacco smoking, they want to get off tobacco. The vast majority of the data currently tells us that most people who try to quit tobacco smoking with e-cigarettes are not successful. There is some emerging data that shows that it may be successful, but in a fairly small percentage of people who try. The biggest issue is that among those who smoke tobacco cigarettes who try to quit with vape, the majority of them cut down on the cigarettes, but they continue some tobacco smoking and vaping. And what we're seeing is that when a person continues to smoke some cigarettes and to vape, they increase their risk of heart and circulatory problems and other health risks above what they were when they were only smoking tobacco cigarettes. In the studies that have shown a fairly small percentage of people being successful in quitting tobacco cigarettes with e-cigarettes, what we're seeing is the vast majority of those quitters are sticking with e-cigarettes at nicotine levels that are similar to what they were taking in when they were smoking cigarettes. And we're beginning to now see data that tells us about the health risks of nicotine by itself. We didn't study that in the past. We used to study the impact of tobacco smoke as a whole, which included the tar and the other components of tobacco smoke that are not found in vape, but we didn't independently look at nicotine. And now that we're able to look at vaping, we're looking more closely at nicotine. So while vaping might be less harmful by itself than smoking to somebody who smokes cigarettes, we really know that the best outcome for their health is to get off of the tobacco cigarettes, and if they've used vaping to help them, to get off the vape completely so they're no longer reliant on nicotine at all. Okay. Long-winded answer to your question.
Does vaping cause popcorn lung?
This is one of my favorite bugaboos. So, as far as we know, there are no reported cases of popcorn lung among vapors. The association comes from a chemical that's found in a lot of vape juices for flavoring called diacetyl. And diacetyl was notoriously used in the microwave popcorn industry as a flavoring agent for microwave popcorn. We found that workers in those industrial settings that were making the microwave popcorn started experiencing severe lung problems that later became known as popcorn lung or bronchiolitis obliterans. It literally obliterates the lungs. It causes them to sort of melt. That is an irreversible health problem, and that was from industrial breathing exposure. We have not yet seen a case of popcorn lung reported with vaping, people who vape, but we have been seeing growing numbers of lung irritation and lung problems, including a large number of cases that have been recently reported to the CDC, but for which the cause is not yet being speculated, only that there's a large and growing cluster of cases being reported of severe lung problems requiring emergency room and hospital care, and that the commonality among those people seems to be that they have been vaping.
Okay. Someone asked and wanted to clarify that the legal age to purchase vape products is over 21 and over. And so how are the youth getting the products if they have to be over 21 to purchase?
So correct, yes. In Hawaii, the age 21 law is for all tobacco products, including vape and e-liquids. Kids have been getting them online. They can go to any shop and buy a MasterCard or a Visa gift card, and then they've been going online and using those like credit cards to buy bulk vape products and then reselling them in onesies and twosies to their friends at school. We know that vape shops are not consistently abiding by the age 21 law, and that there are underage sales taking place in vape shops, in convenience stores, and other places that sell especially the pod-based products. Kids are really, really clever at finding workarounds when they want something. And this is why we want to have a full ban on all of the flavored tobacco and vape products in the state. That means that they will not be available. It will allow for unflavored and nicotine-flavored vape, which are unappealing to kids, to be available to adults who want to use vape to get off of or reduce their cigarette smoking. And in addition, we are pushing for regulation of e-cigarette products in the state, including a ban on retail sales delivered by mail and by delivery service, so that vape shops could order and have their supplies delivered as distributors, but that they could not sell and ship to individuals, and that the Postal Service and the carriers would not be legally allowed to deliver any vape products or tobacco products to individual purchasers in the state.
Okay, so I'm going to ask, are all of the health risks that you had mentioned earlier the same for cannabis ESDs? So youth who are smoking the vape, are they susceptible to the same risks when it's cannabis?
So the cannabis question, we don't know the answers. First of all, some of the risks of e-cigarettes are associated with the nicotine. We don't know if the e-liquid with the cannabis does or does not contain nicotine. So if we take nicotine off the discussion table and we only focus on the cannabis and on the other e-liquid components, then the risks would be similar for the components, but we'd have to figure out which are those components and what are the risks. We still would likely see the metal particles in the vape, but then we also don't know what the cannabis constituent is. Is it THC? Is it an extract of the cannabis plant that has a lot of other chemicals? So this is basically another unanswered question, and the use of these products far exceeds what we've been able to learn scientifically about the risks associated with their use.
How realistic is it for FDA to review all ESD applications in 1 year, in your opinion?
I think that it is realistic for the FDA to be able to review those applications. Remember, the application deadline is May of 2020. That does not prevent any company from putting their application in earlier. That's the latest that the applications have to be in. And we're expecting that the FDA is going to make a significant effort to review these products. They did announce yesterday or the day before that they've sent warning letters to a handful of companies to cease and desist, to remove their products from the market. But these are not the big players like Juul, and it's unclear why it is that these companies have been targeted. But it shows that FDA is beginning to take a stronger regulatory stance toward e-cigarettes. And we're hoping that they'll follow through and address the applications in a timely manner.
What is being done to reduce or eliminate advertising for vape shops and vaping devices? Someone mentioned that they noticed Juul is changing their ads to show older people and are advocating to increase the age of vaping to 21.
So there's a couple of questions there. The vaping among the advertising among vape shops is currently unregulated. You may see ads on TV. You will definitely hear them on the radio here in Hawaii. You'll see them in every possible corner of our island society. And this is legally allowed currently. It's not clear what will happen in the future. Those of us that are in the public health arena would like to see vape and vape products treated just like all other tobacco products, with highly limited, really big limits on advertising, because the advertising helps to normalize the appearance and the use of these products. So the other half was, remind me.
How do they reduce, what's being done to reduce or eliminate advertising?
Okay. There was another half, I'm sorry.
And then she's noticing that Juul is changing their ads to show older.
So Juul, historically, Juul's been around since about 2015, when they grabbed, between 2015 and 2018, they grabbed about 80% of the e-cigarette market. And they did that by using social media and to appeal to kids. And they have been called out over the last couple of years, and they are trying to rehabilitate their image by now claiming that their products were not intended for kids, that they never intended to market them to kids. There are lawsuits that are in the works right now in which Discovery may bring out more information about how intentional and how knowingly Juul did advertise to kids. But again, they are trying to rehabilitate their image by changing from color and from youth-friendly imaging to those full-page newspaper ads in black and white showing older smokers who are thanking Juul for having given them an alternative to tobacco smoke. We have to wait and see. It seems like on a near weekly basis, something new comes out about something underhanded or unethical that Juul has been doing over the years to reach kids, especially in the absence of the adults who in the schools, in summer camps, and in other youth settings should have been present for presentations that were delivered by Juul representatives and who were not present in the room at the time.
Is there any pending information on regulations or possible regulations as to the dangers for vape access, the dangers of access of vape shops to minors? Are there any information on regulations that you know at this time?
I'm not aware of regulations that are being proposed at a national level, but here in Hawaii, last year, and we will again this year, pushed for regulations so that all of the vape shop owners have to register, that there is a licensing fee to be able to sell vape in a store, that that the vape shop owner is responsible for any sales to minors under 21s of products in their vape shops. Right now, it's the clerk who's responsible and can be fined a modest fee, but it doesn't impact the ability of that shop to continue to sell vape products. And there are some other components to the vape regulation to bring regulation in line with current tobacco cigarette regulation in the state.
So I want to confirm, currently e-liquids, including marijuana oil and wax, is not regulated in any way. So producers are not required accurately to list their ingredients, correct?
Right. Currently, the manufacturers are not required to list the ingredients of their vape products, the e-juices, that contain nicotine or are nicotine-free. The products that contain cannabis are not legal unless they were manufactured and sold by one of the license holders of the cannabis dispensaries that are licensed through the Department of Health in the state of Hawaii. There is no legal cannabis that produced or sold retail outside of that dispensary system. Anything else is illegal. and it's subject to the Controlled Substances Act.
Okay. So I want to ask, when someone is inhaling from a mod and there's no smoke, is that vaping of nicotine or another substance?
So the mods are the devices that the purchaser buys various components and puts them together to modify the quality and quantity of the vape. You can dial down the voltage, the amount of electricity being fed to the coil, and you can modify to some degree the quality of the e-liquid to produce much less vape. I'm not aware of devices for vaping that produce no visible vape. One of the technology changes with the pod system like Juul is that they use a lower wattage battery that heats the coil to a lower temperature, producing a less dense vape that is more easily and discreetly hidden by vapors, including kids. We used to hear stories, and we still hear stories about kids vaping in a classroom in front of the teachers, and the teacher doesn't know who's vaping because the kids can blow the small amount of vape down their sleeve discreetly, and you can smell it in the room, but you can't tell who's vaping.
What community resources are available for youth who want to decrease or quit their nicotine use?
This is a big challenge for us. Locally at schools, the schools are trying to find approaches to help. Some schools are trying to develop formal programs. There is, again, the Truth Initiative text-based program that everybody can use. Youth can call the Hawai'i Quit line and get some limited support. Youth can talk to their pediatricians and see what kind of support their pediatrician and their health plan can provide. But currently, we do not have a coherent and cohesive statewide or even island-wide cessation support program for kids. We are trying to develop pilot projects currently and begin to explore what will be most valuable, what will be most effective in helping kids quit vaping.
Have you heard of any adolescents developing psychosis from vaping due to possibly inhaling bath salts?
We have heard of a handful of cases of kids vaping, passing out, and having been taken by ambulance to the emergency room. I haven't heard details, but I believe it's been suspected that cases like that have been due to bath salts, the vaping of bath salts, which is synthetic cannabis, not extracts of the cannabis plant. And again, because there's no way to tell what's in the e-liquid, kids who vape are really at risk because they can't know what's in the e-juice that they're vaping. And if a friend hands them an e-cigarette and they vape, it could be anything from normal e-juice with nicotine to some e-juice that's got some kind of a dangerous or toxic component that could cause serious health harm.
Okay. Someone asked, how does vaping cause or exacerbate stomach ulcers? I thought stomach ulcers were caused by a bacteria. Was that?
The vast majority of stomach ulcers are caused by bacteria, but what makes people susceptible to that bacteria is not as well known. It's Helicobacter pylori is the name of that bacteria. We don't know the mechanism. We only know that there's an increased risk of stomach ulcers among people who vape.
Do you know if the traditional tobacco companies are owners or co-owners of Juul and other e-cigarette companies? And are they doing this to target a younger market to smoke similar to the 1950s?
So the answer to the question is that a year ago, the answer would have been no. In fact, the tobacco companies had all tried to bring out their own vape devices, and they've all failed horribly. But this last winter, Altria, the company that makes and sells Marlboro cigarettes, bought about a 1/3 stake in Juul for several billion dollars. I think it was about $13 billion. So they clearly see that vape is the future for nicotine delivery, and they want a strong foothold in the nicotine delivery market for the U.S. because they see the handwriting on the wall that tobacco cigarettes are slowly on the way out. It's a shrinking market. They're focusing their tobacco sales markets on third world countries that don't have tobacco control laws, but we are likely to see more tobacco companies entering in or trying to find ways to get a foothold on the vape market. But Altria made the big jump when they bought a 1/3 stake in Juul about 6 months ago.
Are the metals in the aerosol permanently absorbed by the body when it's inhaled, or is it excreted?
We don't have a lot of data on the full pharmacokinetics, including the excretion of the metal particles. We don't know the degree to which they impact the lungs or the degree to which they get into the bloodstream. We know that they're present in the vape, and we know that that the lungs are exposed and that the lungs are the extremely sensitive tissues through which air exchange takes place in the lungs, including very tiny particles that are included in the vape. We're unfortunately in a position right now where science is lagging way behind the leapfrogging of the vape technology, and we're kind of in a place right now where we were with understanding the health risks of tobacco back in the 50s and 60s, before the Surgeon General reported that there was an undeniable link between tobacco smoking and cancer. And then further research found all of the other health risks, including cardiovascular harms and other health risks. We are just beginning to learn about these health risks with a young generation that, if we don't stop their vaping now, could become lifelong vapors and the guinea pigs in an experiment that benefits the vape industry in the absence of the scientific information about health consequences.
808novape.org was mentioned. Are there health education programs being implemented in the schools, and are teachers and staff being trained on what to look for?
So 808 No Vape is not an education program per se. It focuses on messaging that's peer developed by youth, and that it includes the 808 No Vape videos, the development of and painting of no vape murals on school walls across the state. The Coalition for Tobacco-Free Hawaii, in conjunction with the Department of Health and the Hawaii Community Foundation, are working with their local coalition partners on each of the islands to provide vape information and education to teachers, administrators, school staff, and to school students. We're helping the schools to develop education programs that we can then that they can train their teachers to deliver, so that we're reaching more and more adults to raise awareness about the vaping issues, and to help kids become more aware of the choices they have and the potential health impacts of using vape or deciding to avoid vape.
You mentioned Hawaii has a bill to try and stop the sale of vape flavors, since it's mostly kids who like the flavors. Is there an easy way to see if other states are trying to do something similar to stop the sale of these flavored vapes?
I'm not familiar with a single place to see nationally what's going on. I can tell you that a number of municipalities have done it. The first was San Francisco. I read the other day that Berkeley, California has implemented a flavor ban. there are a number of states that have been trying, but Juul has been very effective at undermining the effect of the push for flavor bans at the state level. And as far as I know, there are no states that have currently been successful. California had a bill last year that died. We had a bill last year that died. I can't remember the other states, but I think there were several other states that had bills. But every state that had them and a number that didn't last year will be bringing them back or creating new bills. This is really the issue as far as youth vaping is getting the flavors off the market so the kids are not tempted to use them.
Why has legislation to regulate vaping in Hawaii not passed? Who do we engage in the communities, whether it be parents, students, teachers, or church, to drop rates over the next year instead of seeing them increase?
Thank you for the question and for all the questions. This is a really challenging issue for us in the public health field. We've asked ourselves the same question. Last year, with the Flavors Hook Kids Hawaii campaign for the flavor ban, we were able to create a coalition of more than 100 organizations and more than 100 influential individuals throughout the state in healthcare, in education, in business, in academia, in every sector you can imagine. And the flavor ban was moving successfully through the legislative process until it hit the House Finance Committee, and then it was stopped cold at the last minute. We need to be able to influence, we need to find more champions within the legislature. We need to find champions within every legislative district, both House and Senate throughout the state, so that those local constituencies are sending a clear and strong message to their legislators that youth vaping is unacceptable, and that it's unacceptable for those legislators to allow our kids to continue to vape by leaving them unprotected, and that their home district wants and expects them to vote for a full flavor ban, including menthol, so that we can get kids off of the focus of vaping.
Someone asks, does vaping cause cancer?
We don't know if vaping causes cancer. There is some test tube research that implies that it might, but test tube research does not always translate into what we find in humans. Again, we're just at the beginning end of the scientific study process, and it's going to take decades to know whether or not vaping causes cancer in humans or not.
What are the specific legal consequences of a youth who is found vaping or smoking in school or in public?
So currently, there is a small fine and the possibility of being suspended for a day or two from school if a student is caught vaping at school. We in public health really would like the focus to be on nicotine cessation and education for the youth and their families, rather than it being on penalizing somebody who is addicted to nicotine. We think that the penalty portion is much less effective in bringing kids in who do vape and getting them to engage in both education, prevention education and quitting education, and to get them to trust adults who can help them to quit if they would like to quit, as well as to get a clear message to kids who don't vape or who are vaping but not yet addicted to the nicotine, that it's in their best interest for a lot of reasons, either to avoid to not vape at all or to quit the vaping before they get addicted.
Can manufacturers ask for IDs if a person is buying products online?
Online, the manufacturers are moving to something called I can't remember the other term, but it's a more stringent form of age verification. It's not just something where you give a birth date or click on something that says I'm over 21. But we're already hearing from kids who have learned how to punk those systems, and even when they require scanning in a driver's license or another form of ID, the kids have found ways around it so that they're still able to purchase online. What we really need is a program that prevents the retail delivery of online purchases of nicotine products to end users. It's not allowed for tobacco cigarettes. There's no good reason why it should be allowed with vape products either.
Do tobacco researchers or industry have a pathway with the FDA to conduct research such as IND for drug manufacturers?
So there is nothing that is prohibiting a vape manufacturer from applying for a new drug approval for a vape product to help quit tobacco smoking, like the product of the nicotine patches and nicotine gum had to go through before they were allowed as nicotine quitting products on the U.S. market. So far, no vape company has submitted such an application, and in fact, they've taken advantage of the fact that the tobacco product application process that they were required to follow under the 2016 deeming rule was postponed, and none of them have applied, all of whom will now have to apply by next May, or they run the risk of having their products removed from the market by the FDA.
Okay, we have one last question. Have lobbyists for tobacco been active in Hawaii at the legislature? Do you know any idea why lawmakers thought it was the right thing to do to fine kids, say $100 for having vape products and putting their responsibility on teachers to take away the products rather than go after the vape shop selling to minor, or to ban the sale of flavors because we know that it's the main driver for kids?
We do in fact know that the vape industry and big tobacco came into Hawaii last year with a lot of money and a lot of paid support to talk specifically with legislators who were friendly to tobacco. It seems that there's been a reduction in the interest in tobacco control, especially around vape in the state, since the age 21 law was passed. And we fully expect that this next year, the vape and tobacco industries are going to be here in force, because the last thing they want to see is a first or second or third state initiating a full flavor ban on the vape products. What was the other part? I'm sorry.
Do you have any idea why lawmakers thought it was a good thing to fine the children instead of the vape?
So my understanding is that the majority of lawmakers, in fact, were in favor of the vape regulations gaining parity with the tobacco regulations, but in order to undermine the bill was changed at several junctures by key people that may have been influenced by tobacco to put the onus on parents and on kids rather than on vape shop owners and people who benefit financially from the sale of vape products. And that's an industry tactic that we're seeing across the U.S., that industry influencers are going to key legislators who are friendly to vape and to tobacco and giving them wording which makes a bill sound like it's in the public interest, but it's actually in industry's interest, and it's counter to the health interest of the public.
Awesome. Okay, we'll highlight it back to Steph.
Hi. I just wanted to say thank you to everybody for joining us today. Thank you to Queens for hosting us at their teleconference room. A big mahalo to Dr. Forrest Batz for being our guest speaker today. As a reminder, I will be sending out evaluation links to everybody. Please complete that evaluation, and we will be sending out your certificates by Monday, August 26th. We hope that you join us for our next webinar, which is coming up on Friday, September 20th, and the topic is Behind the Headlines, What is Really Happening with Opioid Use and Treatment. So with that, I just want to close out, say mahalo, and we hope to see you next month.